Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church in Columbia, South Carolina, where we're part of the ELCA. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. It's a story so old and ancient that it seems almost lost in the mists of time. Abraham had dared to believe and act on the promise of an unseen God that he would come to a land that would be his own, and more, that even though he was childless, he would be the father of a great nation. Eventually, Isaac, the child of the promise, was born. And then, how could it be? Abraham was led to sacrifice Isaac to show his devotion to God, to sacrifice this child of the promise, this child who ensured the future. As he trudged up the mountain carrying the fire in his hand and a weight in his heart, Isaac said, "Father, I see the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham, knowing that God had provided Isaac, answered, "God will provide the lamb for the sacrifice, my son." You likely know how this story ended, how God stopped Abraham from sacrificing Isaac, and how a ram was caught in the thicket to take Isaac's place. It was a moment that showed Abraham's devotion, but also one that showed God's mercy. God did provide the lamb. In these days following Easter, our topic for this week is the Easter feast. Feasts and food have an important place in our lives, and you may never have thought much about it, but they have an important place in the Bible too. There are foods and meals especially associated with Easter, and together this week we're going to explore those and look at some larger themes that speak of God's love and salvation for us. Today we begin with a different story about a lamb, Passover. Passover is based in another ancient story, but the mists have burned away in the hot desert sun of Egypt. When this story begins, the Hebrew people have been slaves there in Egypt almost 400 years. To put that in perspective, I think it's helpful to remember that George Washington and the founding of our country is only a little bit over half that time. This was a long, long time, and the people were pining and yearning for their freedom. When the time was right, God sent Moses to lead them out, and when the Pharaoh finally relented and agreed for them to go, the last thing they wanted to do was delay leaving. So they quickly packed what they could take, but the one thing still to do was to eat. It was more than strengthening them for their journey. God had prepared a special meal for them that not only nourished them, but it was also a meal of remembrance to mark what God was doing among them. It began with a lamb, and some of the blood from the lamb was put on their doorposts to mark their houses so that their homes would be passed over in the 10th plague. So the lamb was an important part of this meal. We might even see this lamb pointing to Christ. The lamb died to save the people, and it points to Christ's death on the cross to save us. John the Baptist knew all this when he pointed to Jesus and said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." That's not where this meal begins, however. This special Passover meal also included bitter herbs. In modern times, that is often horseradish, and another part of the meal involves parsley dipped in salt water. In restaurants, most of us ignore that sprig of bitter parsley, but they ate it dipped in salt water to remind them of the bitterness of their lives as slaves in Egypt, and the salt water reminded them of their tears. The bitter herbs and salt water remind them where they came from and how much God was doing for them. I think sometimes we need that reminder too. Then there is the unleavened bread, simple, quick, no time for rising. It was time to leave, time to act in response to God's activity among them. God was not just saving them from something, God was saving them for something, for a new life, a new identity, and a new future. Maybe we should be more open to seeing God at work around us and to be ready to respond to the newness that God has in mind for us. The thing is, God gave them this meal to remember vividly what God had done, how God had saved them and given them new life. When they ate the meal every year, they remembered who God was for them and who they were as God's people. They could taste it. When Jesus celebrated the Last Supper, he was celebrating this meal of salvation. And in the midst of that meal, he gave us a new meal to point to God acting to save us in a new way. He took that unleavened bread and said, "This is my body given for you." With the wine, he said, "This is my blood shed for you." In that meal, we remember and we participate in the new life God has for us. We can hunger for it. We can receive it. We can taste it. Passover and Holy Communion are meals that tell a story, the story of God's love for us. May we taste and see. May we taste and respond. God has provided the lamb for the sacrifice, God's Son. Thanks for sharing these moments with me, and remember to let this day belong to God.